Thanks for listening to the Media People Podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Views expressed by participants are personal. Sales leader, quota crusher, champion of grassroots basketball, hockey podcaster, and arguably the OG of Canadian digital media sports sales, Tony Luccisano stops by to chat. A native of Toronto's Little Italy neighborhood, Tony studied biology with the goal of becoming a doctor. To use his words, his grades weren't going to cut it for med school, which quickly shut down that plan. After school, he joined the Financial Post as a business manager, but would move into online financial service sales with the Datagroup. Tony's digital ad sales career started with Canoe, but he departed Canoe for TSN, arguably Canada's largest and oldest sports media brand, where he would enjoy a nearly 13-year career. A move to competitor Sportsnet was short-lived after a sales team restructuring. Tony has since turned to consulting, putting his experience and success to work for companies looking for fractional growth and experience to jumpstart their revenue potential. But Tony's move into consulting isn't entirely by design. Like many experienced members of the Canadian media industry, his career has been impacted by ageism. We close out our conversation by discussing the impact ageism has had on his career and why it's important for the industry to reject this form of discrimination.
I'm a sales and marketing communication consultant, and what I try to do is help companies achieve some of their sales targets. After the pandemic, though, it's been a little bit soft. It's been a little difficult, as you can imagine. What I try to do is I try to find companies who really don't have a full sales force, and what I try to do is do some fractional sales for them. So that's the basic of my consulting company. So I've been in sales a long time, and I feel like I have a lot to offer still. So, I wouldn't mind still getting back into the game. I'm the consulting gig is okay. It's not bad. But where my strengths are is working with salespeople and sales staff and companies and trying to reach their goals, help them reach their goals.
Tony, thank you so much for stopping by today. I'm looking forward to our chat. Let's go back to the beginning, though. Where are you from?
Born and raised in the west end of Toronto, around the High Park area. Actually, Little Italy, if you want to call it, St. Clair and Lansdowne area. Great Italian family. Mom was a homemaker, dad a factory worker, very lower middle class. But you know the way Italian families are. They
oh yeah, I know that.
You know it probably as well as I do. But you know what? It was a great upbringing. Like I said, lots of friends and lots of sports. Played in little close to Little Italy, and it was a huge Italian community, and we just had a blast. So my upbringing was fantastic in Toronto.
I'm familiar with that neighborhood a little bit for the most part, because you said High Park, St. Clair. My mom grew up in Dufferin and Rogers Road.
Oh, I know it extremely well.
Yeah.
There was Ital Florist was right there at Dufferin and Rogers Road.
Yeah, I know exactly which one you're talking about. You could either get to it by taking the Ossington bus from the station across Rogers Road, or you take the Dufferin bus right north, right from literally the Dufferin subway station.
Victor,
those were unique neighborhoods.
Yeah, they were. You're a man after my own heart.
So did you guys have an alleyway garage as well?
No, actually, I was in a semi-detached right on a main street, right on DuPont Street. So we did have that, unfortunately.
Oh, because that's what I remember about it too. Okay, so what did your backyard look like? Because it's got to be broken hockey sticks and tomato plants and grapes.
Obviously, somebody's been spying on me. Because I'm telling you nailed it. I didn't have any hockey sticks. I'd have a hockey stick for one season. And then the funniest story I could tell you about that, a quick one, is I used to try to play lacrosse, and I played one game. And I came home, and my mom saw my back because it was full of black. It was black and blue from the bruises. And of course, old Italian mom's just sitting there screaming, "What the hell happened? Who did this to my son?" And my dad then proceeded to saw my lacrosse stick and use the shaft as a hold up for the tomato plants. So you nailed it with the tomato plants, the basil. I almost said it in Italian, basilico. And then of course there was the parsley. And so there was just all my backyard was vegetation. That's it.
That's what the typical Italian backyard is like. It's literally all garden and maybe a little bit of a deck as well on top of that.
Very small deck, very small, enough just for a barbecue and a charcoal barbecue. None of this
You,
electric
it
stuff.
was a charcoal barbecue.
No,
Okay,
no propane stuff.
did the neighbors ever call the cops on your parents for that? Because my grandparents used to use the charcoal barbecue, and if they were having a row with the neighbors, they would call the fire department. The fire department would show up, and it would just be like, "No, it's just a regular charcoal barbecue. We didn't set anything on fire in the backyard."
That didn't happen to me, but three doors down, exactly that's exactly what happened. They called the fire department. Just three doors down, which was hilarious. I swear, it's almost like you've got a crystal ball into my past.
Oh, I spent a lot of time in that neighborhood growing up, so I'm very familiar with life is like there, especially too, like kids playing on the street. It's what you'd expect from a neighborhood.
Yeah, you don't see that nowadays, that's for sure.
No, the kids are all face down in their phones.
It's kind of sad, but hey, this is the new world. And you know what? I'm also a basketball referee, and I could tell you stories about that as well. I mean, with these kids, I'm just glad that they're playing sports and they're not constantly on their phones, though.
Basketball was a big thing for you growing up. Like it is, would you say it's your sport versus hockey? Because you've been heavily in sports marketing, sports sales. You're passionate about sports, but would you say that basketball has been the most pivotal sport to your life?
It was. I had a scholarship offered to Canisius. Now, back then, it was a D3 school for basketball, and I ended up staying at home because my parents sadly were sick, and I ended up going to Seneca. I played a year at Seneca, but what ended up happening was I found that school and basketball was just too much, so I concentrated on my studies, which was biology, which of all the things, right?
I know that is pretty crazy. Let's go back to Canisius for a little bit. I'm familiar with it
Yeah,
because I went to Brock University, so I know the border schools. So is that Buffalo or Niagara Falls, New York, Cheektowaga? Like I'm literally
right.
throwing out every city possible
Yeah,
from
you miss Batavia and Hamburg as well.
Hamburg. That's right.
Yeah, but it's Buffalo is where Canisius is.
So how did you get scouted for that? Like, were the scouts just going over the border? Did you have to consciously go to a combine or a tryout?
No, not at all. Actually, they came out to. We played in a couple of tournaments, big tournaments, the St. Mike's tournament, the Runnymede tournament. These were big tournaments in the late '70s, or actually mid '70s. I guess '77 was when it was. And I played with Leo Routens every Saturday. We would play at the Annette Recreation Center with guys like Norman Clark, who also went down to St. Bonaventure. The Jones brothers, Paul and Mark, Paul and Mark are both in television now. They do the Raptors game, and Paul is down in the U. I believe he's still at ESPN and down in Bristol, Connecticut. So I played with some pretty good players back then. And now that I'm refereeing, I see a bunch of these guys that I either played with, and their grandfathers now, and they come out to cheer their grandkids on. It's incredible. It's a small community, but there's a large number of kids playing, and in fact, it's as big as hockey is right now.
How did you find basketball? Because this was before we had an NBA team up here. How did you
Yes.
find basketball, and who were you rooting for then back then? Who was your NBA team? Because that's one of the brilliant things about not having an NBA team, at least at the time, is you get the pick of the litter. No one will
Okay,
question why you're a
so
Hawks fan versus a Knicks fan or so forth.
this is where my years of experience, I call it my years of experience, comes in. Back in the '70s, there was a team out of Buffalo called the Buffalo Braves, who now are the LA Clippers. So there was basketball very close to here, and sometimes the Buffalo Braves would actually play at Maple Leaf Gardens, and they play exhibition games, and they actually played regular season game. They played two, I think, regular season games at Maple Leaf Gardens. So it was one of those things that I used to play pickup with my friends. And even when I went into grade 9, I was one of the smallest kids in school in grade 9. I was only 4 feet 10. But then one year I grew 6 inches, one year I grew 7. And we had a teacher strike in 1975. And I started playing basketball then a lot more. And I just practiced and practiced and practiced. And I just had this absolute love for the game. And between that and another sport, tennis, which I picked up a little later, became my two go-to games. And I wasn't really I never played a lot of hockey, but I still love hockey, of course, being Canadian.
Did you follow them to LA and become a Clippers fan?
No, then I changed affiliations and went to the Washington Bullets because there was a guy I loved the way he played there. called Elvin Hayes, the Big E, as he was known as. So then they showed a whole bunch of the Washington games, and every time they were on, I just loved the way they played, and I became a fan of theirs. And then they won the championship, I think in '77 or '78, and I just stuck with them for the longest time. And then when the Raptors obviously came to Toronto, I became a huge Raptors fan.
And it's been a good run ever since, I'd say. We've had some bad years, but who would have
But
thought we're NBA championships or
yeah,
NBA champions?
and I think, Victor, I think that should be all given credit to it. The person who should get the most credit there is Vince Carter. The Vince Carter effect
I agree.
is enormous. It truly is. In fact, last year in the NBA, just to give you a little idea, Canada had the most drafted NBA players, or actually, Canada has the most NBA players outside of the US. So there's more Canadians playing in second most country represented in the NBA is Canada.
What was number three, or what did we relegate to number three? Like, where did the second source of players come from?
What happened was each province has really taken basketball to new heights. These kids, for some reason, once they found out Canada has a team, the growth of all these kids wanting to play is just grown exponentially. Like I see it every week because, like I said, I'm on the court probably a lot. Last year I did 357 games I refereed, and that was just after the pandemic. This year I'll probably end up doing a bit more because we're short on referees as well, and the game is growing so fast. And what I'm really surprised at is little girls are playing basketball, and a lot of little girls are playing basketball, and they're staying in the sport, which is so great to see. God love the kids. I'm telling you, the parents sacrifice so much. They pay so much money to have their kids play basketball. And I'm in awe every week that I go out and I talk to a lot of the parents, and it's incredible. It's just the growth of the sport is off the charts.
Are you surprised we don't have a WNBA team yet? Because I kind of am.
Yes, I truly am. And I think that will be coming. I think the WNBA right now is still, I would say, laying the foundation for the growth of the sport in the US, especially after the pandemic. It actually grew more than any other sport after the pandemic, and it's still growing stronger. And I truly believe, knowing a few of the girls that I have refed and have gotten scholarships down, who I've seen them go. There's a girl at Connecticut who used to play at Crestwood Preparatory School up here, and they're going to continue to go down to the U.S. I refereed a tournament, which was basically an elite club tournament, and a lot of these girls who play a lot of them are going to go on to scholarships, and a bunch of them are going to go to the WNBA. And the Kia Nurse factor is huge as well. And Kia, you see her on TSN a lot, and she's really promoting the game, the women's game, like no one else has. And she's a great ambassador for the sport. Her and Kate Burness, who I had the pleasure of knowing and working with at TSN, for all those years that I was there.
Another parallel between you and I is our love of comic books. How did you find it? And who are your heroes?
Okay. It's funny that you should say that because it was a buddy of mine named Roy McDonald, and he was into it. And I'm like, really? You're into this? He says, it's going to be worth money one day. You got to buy these comics. And I go, well, okay. So I started reading some of his, and I found myself attracted to Captain America, and he was a Daredevil guy. So we started going. There was a place down on Markham Street called Captain George, very famous comic place down on Markham Street near Honest Ed's. And I would go in there, and we would go in there, and anytime, I'd always ask my mom for a quarter or 50 cents, and I'd go down there and I would start buying comics. And so I started collecting them and reading them. And he said, make sure you put them in plastic. And I go, why would I do that? He goes, because you want to crinkle them. It'll ruin the value. What the hell did I know then about ruining value of a comic? But I just did what Roy told me to do. And now I've got this collection. I've got Captain America number 100, which was valued at $1,600. I've got a couple of, if there's a few great artists. I've got I'm just thinking of Joker number 2, or the Joker, the one with Batman number 251, Neil Adams,
Neil Adams, he just passed away.
It's funny. I was just going to say that. So you do know your comics.
Oh,
So
I mean,
yeah,
Danny O'Neill. Yeah, no, I'm familiar with Neil Adams.
yeah.
God,
Neil
no, I'm
Adams,
like
Selva
all
Schuma, Jack Kirby, you
Steve
know,
Ditko.
Steve Ditko. Absolutely. So now we have another love of sports and comics. And I was really shocked when you said you love comics as well, because there's not many people that I run into that say, and know who Neil Adams is and the value of what a Neil Adams comic is worth.
I got into a lot of his Batman work in the 80s.
Right.
And I just, because that's when I started to fall into it. Like, okay, did you not have, say, for example, the 60s Batman show kind of push you into it? Because it did that for me. Like, when that came on, comics were really secondary. It was that show that kind of pushed me into that world. And I kind of tell anyone that will listen that that's the gateway drug. When people are like, oh, Batman is probably the biggest bankable character, I'm like, it's because of that show. That show was appealing to kids and it was larger than life.
Agreed. And so was there was the black and white Superman that they used to show on Channel 7 from Buffalo. And
Was that the one with, oh God, what's his name?
George
George Reeves? George
Reeves.
Reeves? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly who it was. And let's not forget the very famous Spider-Man cartoon.
Oh God, yeah. That especially that theme song. That
Right.
theme song will live on forever. It will outlive
And
the character.
there's no kid who grew up in our era or in my era and probably your era that will not know that theme song.
I've started to sit my little nephew down. He's big into Spider-Man. He's just over 3 years old, and he'll want to watch the new stuff on Disney Plus, and I'll pull up the old one and be like, nope, you need a history lesson.
Yeah, and those were all done by cells too, single cells, right? Like, and a buddy of mine actually, the same guy, Roy, he collects cartoon cells, and they're worth even more. He's got some that are worth as much as $100,000.
And what I found really funny about those cartoons is how they used to recycle the certain aspects, like Spider-Man swinging through the city. It's like we're going to use this 10 seconds of footage for every episode because that's the only way he's going to get around the cost-saving measures they had back then.
It was great. It was great. It's kind of it kind of makes us who we are, today. That's for sure.
Why do you consider your dad as your biggest influence?
I was always the class clown in school. I joke around. Even when I'm refereeing and I'm talking to the parents. My humor is what makes me. And anyone who's ever worked with me will tell you, Luch, funny guy. And it's all because of my dad. I mean, he was so funny. He would, mom would be the authoritarian, the disciplinarian in the house. And he would kind of always make jokes about it. And she would get upset with him and he's still cracking jokes. And so I thought, what a way to live, just joking around all the time. And so, you know what? I looked up to him so much, and it just saddened me that I lost him at such a young age. I was 20 years old, and it just ripped my heart. And there isn't, anytime I laugh, and he told me, the one thing he told me, Victor, was he said, my son, he goes, if you can make one person laugh every day, he says, you will lead a very rewarding life. Right. And I'll never forget that as well. So he gave me, like, my friends used to call him the man of reason, because he used to have all these little sayings. And one of them was just that, right? Make one person laugh and you'll live basically every day, totally enriched is what he was saying. And he was right. I love making people laugh. I love laughing myself. My wife and I go to a lot of comedy shows, and laughter is truly the best medicine, I find.
Do you do any of the Second City shows? Because I find those are fantastic.
I have, but we love going to see comics like at Absolute Comedy or Yuck Yucks, and we just actually were one at a couple of just a month ago. I saw a friend of mine by the name of Frank Spadoni, Italian guy, and he was just again just always laughing, making me laugh. And as he said to me, he says, he's told me 100 times, Luch, you should become a stand-up because you're a pretty funny guy. And I said, no, I'm more of, give me an improvisation. Maybe I should take Second City classes is what I should do, because it seems like it's a lot of fun.
But don't you find we do that in sales anyways? Like, you're literally put in front of a room, and sometimes what you have to deliver, I'm going to be honest, is boring. Like, sometimes the presentation you have to deliver is not very entertaining. So you kind of have to find ways to jazz it up to keep people engaged, especially when everyone's sitting around the table with their phones. And I don't know about you, but one of the worst things that can happen in an in-person meeting God knows we'll get back to full in-person meetings someday, is when you're
Yeah.
doing your shtick, you're out 4 or 5 slides and you feel like you're in the groove, and then one person in the corner picks up their phone and flips it around. And it's like you can't help but focus on that. And I find that it causes a bit of an imbalance for me when I'm delivering my presentation. And it takes me a while it takes me another slide or so to just get back on track.
You're absolutely right. It is kind of sad when that happens. And I always used to crack jokes up in meetings. I'd always start off by trying to say something funny, especially when I'm meeting somebody. And the luxury I had was, working in sports for as long as I did was, you know, can be pretty exciting, but if the audience isn't right, you've got to hold what's the word, I guess, the
Their
best word,
attention.
their attention. You've got to hold it with something that'll comedy is usually a way out of it. And a lot of times when I used to go out on sales calls with my reps, they would ask me to come because they know that I'd always be in the background, but I'd always have something funny to say. And I would say, "Do you guys really want me to come to this meeting? It doesn't seem like much." And they're like, "Luch, seriously? You gotta crack these people up because they're pretty boring people." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll come to the meeting." And sure as all hell, I was there for a couple of times for comedic relief, and it helped make the sale. That's the beauty. They'd always thank me at the end. "Oh my God, you were great." And I say, "Thanks. I didn't think I did anything. You did all the heavy lifting." I used to tell them.
Well, it's because people want to work with people they enjoy interacting with, people that they trust. It's not just always the product, even though in this industry, when you've got behemoths like Meta and Facebook, people can't buy around those. They've got to buy through them. But it kind of forces us to, how do I put it? If you're at a smaller shop, it forces you to bring your personality to the meeting.
People will remember your personality. I mean, you've got to separate yourself from everybody else. Because of the metas, and these big giant conglomerates that have come to the forefront. You've got to really figure out how to stand out in front of everybody. And unless you use your personality and as a strength, you're going to be left behind because people will say, "Hey, you know what? I don't really need this guy. He's nothing." But if you can make an impression and stand out, they're going to remember you, and they're like, "You know what? Yeah, let's give this guy let's give him a shot. He seems like a really good guy. He's funny. He's personable." And you move forward with that. But nowadays it's a grind. I've got to say, I still talk to a lot of people in the industry, and a lot of them say, "Luch, it's not like it used to be." And I get that. And I'm just wondering, why did this happen? That's all I wonder is why. Why are you being ghosted? Why aren't you taking phone calls? And everyone says, "Oh, we're too busy. We're too busy." But is it that, or has this become an excuse in the industry? We're too busy. Whatever happened to the human interaction? The most personable thing that you can do is talk to another human being. And you know what? Maybe they might have something for you that you can actually use, but you won't know unless you actually pick up a phone or take a meeting. But nowadays, everybody is so busy. You've got to question, where their time management skills
Your first shot in the working world, though, was sweeping up the floor
is.
at your brother-in-law's barber shop. Speaking of first, so take us back to that. How did that come about?
I believe there weren't even child labor laws back then, Victor, to be honest, and there should have been because every day, every time he cut a head or hair, should I say head, but I'd be sitting there and I'd have my little broom and he'd make me sweep up the floor, and then he'd give me the dollar at the end of the week to say thank you, and I'd go and buy candy, and right next door there was a Becker's. I'll never forget it. There was a
Oh,
Becker's next to his barber shop on Dufferin and Castlefield, just up the street from Dufferin and Rogers, where you grew up. So, it was funny. He was a good guy. God rest his soul. He was a super guy, and he treated me really well.
but you credit your first real job, your words, at Ontario Place. So what were you doing there?
Oh, I was one of those kids at 16, I believe I was, and I was sweeping the bridge and sweeping up the Forum. The Forum was a great place. They had some unbelievable concerts back then, right?
I
So
remember the
after
forum.
Yeah, so the rounding the round the stage, right? And so the groups would go around in a circle the whole, it would take a little while for it to make a complete revolution. But I was sitting there and I would clean up after the shows, and it was a great way of meeting girls. I'll tell you that, especially as a young 16-year-old Italian boy, right? Hey, how are you? How are you? Great. You here for the show? And you just talk to them. It was fantastic.
This was well before the Budweiser stage.
Oh yeah, that's basically where it was, where the Budweiser stage is now, and they used to have Children's Village right next door to it as well. So there was like all these rides, and there was, these rubber bouncing houses, and kids would come there, and part of a half of it was a water park. So and I'd be in there sweeping up as well because kids would make a mess, and I'd have to clean the bathrooms and that was my first job. It was what it was. But yeah, this was well before the Budweiser stage. No, I was going to say before the Molson Amphitheater. Before that, I got to plug the sponsors, right? It's always about the sponsorship.
It's always about the sponsors. Well, what I remember most is the water park, Blueberry Hill, and the Forum.
Right, exactly.
And so Blueberry Hill's still there, but there's just nothing happening. It's kind of depressing. I was there with my wife and my dog over the summer, and we were walking around it, and I'm like, this place had so much more going for it. It's a real relic of what it used to be, and it's in a way it's kind of like a mausoleum to your own childhood because you're looking around going, here's everything that I used to enjoy, but I can't really take advantage of it because you can just see things like the bridges, for example, are rusting over. They need a fresh coat of paint. No one seems to be going to the Cinesphere. The Forum is still there, but it's in lockdown. You can't actually get into it. And there's a giant water slide that doesn't have any water and no one's sliding down it. Like, it's kind of depressing seeing the shape it's been left in.
Yeah, the Cinesphere also brought back great memories now that you mentioned it. I totally forgot about the Spinosphere because I would have to go in there and sweep up as well. And a funny story was, I was walking on the bridge cleaning up one day, and this one guy who was my age, he was trying to impress his girlfriend. He looked over at me and he goes, "Oh, that must be the sanitation engineer." And I'll never forget, it made me so mad, right? And I turned around and I whacked him with my broom in the back of the head. And he says, "I'm going to have you fired." And I went, "You go downstairs." I go, "That's where my boss's office is." And he starts walking back, and then I never saw him again. I was expecting my boss to call me, never called me. I guess the threat was there, but he never followed through on it. That's for sure. But it just made me so mad when he called me the sanitational engineer. Actually, kind of a nice title, really.
It does seem very technical, that's for sure. Speaking of being technical, you already mentioned that you went to Seneca for biology. So why biology? How did you find yourself studying that? Because we know you ended up in advertising, and biology isn't the normal path into advertising.
No, it definitely isn't. And it's funny because I loved biology in school. I really did. And I thought I was going to be a doctor. And then I realized, oh, you have to be like smart to be a doctor. And I go, this just may not work. And I did well, but my marks were in the 70s. It was not, the 90s that I needed to get into med school. So, I ended up working after there. I ended up working in accounting at the Ministry of Health. So that was my first real job in accounting of all things. And I hated it. And I lasted a little while there. And then I went into retail for about 6 or 7 years working at Granada Television.
There's a name I have not heard in a while.
And I used to, and I was the youngest regional manager at the age of 31. I was in charge of 7 stores. And then the retail rental market collapsed. And that was the end of that. So, it was a fun job. It was a great job. Met a lot of my friends that I still to this day talk to and keep in touch with. And it was just, whenever you get a bunch of guys who are into sports and you're working at the same place, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, and you can have these long-term relations with, you feel, okay, that was destined to happen. So yeah, it was a fun place though. Granada was great.
It's crazy. There doesn't even seem to be much of an electronics market anymore. It's like you've got your computer, which can serve as everything. You've got your television. It's like one place that I used to frequent was, remember Cromer Radio?
Oh, absolutely.
On Bathurst. Yeah.
Bathurst. Yeah. The big yellow and black sign. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I used to, when I was a teenager, that's where I got my second car stereo from. And you can't even get car stereos anymore. Like, that's just not the way they're set up for that. Like, that whole market is completely evaporated. It's now just Bluetooth your phone to whatever you have in your car, and then just let your Spotify playlist take over. And that's that.
Can I ask you one question about Cromer Radio? Did
Yeah,
you
go
have a
for it.
Did you have a Blaupunkt?
I have no idea what that is.
Blaupunkt was the name of the actual company that made the actual the stereo system. It was a
Oh no,
Blaupunkt stereo. What did you
it was a
have?
Sony. It was a Sony.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sonys were pretty good too,
It
right?
did
So
had a
they were.
detachable faceplate, which was supposed to deter thieves. It didn't, but they still. I'm sure they. Yeah, I did. My first stereo faceplate. I'll never forget. They stole it, and I'm just like, "You're kidding me? They stole it!" And
Oh my
I had
God.
the faceplate. So through insurance, I went to Cromer, got a new one put in with another detachable faceplate, and that one lived on. But it was still funny that that didn't stop them.
Oh, how good was that?
If
That was
anyone's
great.
wondering, that's how we used to deter car stereo thieves. That was a thing. They didn't take the whole car, just your stereo in the middle of the night, and you could
Yeah.
take the faceplate off.
Oh, how times have changed, eh, pal?
Oh, believe me, yeah, things have changed quite a bit. But okay, so you moved into from retail and then into media, but it didn't start immediately in media when you landed at the Financial Post. So tell us about your first role there, because you were working in the event space.
Yes, I was the conference manager, basically business manager slash conference manager. And I was given an opportunity by a great guy who, sadly passed away a few years ago by the name of Tom Holmes. What a wonderful man he was. And he basically gave me a crash course in business 101. He had 2 degrees from Harvard, and he was just an absolutely brilliant guy. And I looked up to him so much. And as a conference manager, it was a great gig. I got to know a lot about different businesses, whether it was mergers and acquisition, the healthcare industry. We ran a conference on doing business with Aboriginal Canada. We did the automotive industry was a big conference that we used to run every year. So I got to learn a lot about a lot of different areas. And as well, while I was there, I got to meet a lot of my friends in advertising. And that's when I started to get the bug because I made a lot of friends and they would talk about it and they kept saying, Luch, you should come over to advertising. Luch, you should come over to advertising. But I never got the real opportunity. But I knew I wanted to go into sales. And that's when because I was at the Financial Post, I ended up working in the Datagroup. And in the Datagroup, I was able to sell online financial services. And that's where I got a lot of my selling experience. That's where, I got to, um, bite my, get my, as they say, get the whistle wet in advertising or in selling. And so that's, a person took a chance on me and it just developed from there. And then from there, I was with a friend of mine who was over on the Canoe side, and they were literally next door. And she was selling advertising, and she says, you should try to come over. We need a sales rep. And I met a guy by the name of David Schwamm who said the reason I brought you over was there's something about you that I like. I know you don't have any experience. I'll never forget those words. He says, you've never carried the bag per se, right? Which mean I didn't really call on agencies or nothing to do with advertising. He says, but you know what, my gut feeling says, Luch, I gotta hire you. I have to hire you. And he did. And I didn't let him down. In my first year I brought in over $1 million in sales, and that was my first jump into the advertising game.
And then from there, you made it to the mother of all sports stations. Did you feel like you died and gone to heaven when you landed at TSN?
Yeah, I actually did. It was like, pinch me. This isn't really happening and it was funny because when I was at Canoe, I went to a Toronto Argonauts, by the way, the current Grey Cup champions. I went
Shout out to
to
them, yeah.
shout out to the Argos, and I went to a Toronto Argonaut press conference, and I ran into a friend of mine who I knew was at TSN, Keith Pelly. And this would be the same Keith Pelly who is the commissioner of the DP World Golf Tour right now. And he was, as at that time, he's vice president of programming. And he asked me what I was doing there. And I told him, and he asked me about his website. And I said, yeah, I'm on it every single day. And he says, well, I said to him, how much money are you guys bringing in, right, in terms of sales? Because I was at Canoe and I was bringing in $1 million. And he told me $300,000. And I went, are you kidding me? That's it? I go, my target's $1 million, right? I could bring in $1 million easy. And he says, are you kidding me? He goes, there's actually there's actually a case study there that you can actually make that kind of money in this business. And I said, seriously? And he goes, I want you to come in and meet one of the vice presidents, another vice president by the name of Bart Yabsley. And Bart, who happens to be now the current president of Sportsnet, I met him, and he said to me, tell Bart what you told me. I said, about what? He goes, how much money you can bring in? I said, I can bring in $1 million. And he says, really? There's actually value in this, like, digital stuff? And I go, well, what's wrong with you people? And he goes, okay, so if we hired you, you can bring in $1 million in your first year. I said, absolutely, no question. So literally within 2 days, they called me and they said, okay, we want you to come in. We want to hire you. And the rest, as they say, was history. My first year, I brought in $1.36 million. I'll never forget that number as long as I live.
I've had a couple of instances like that in my digital career where you kind of have to gently tell people the internet's catching on. It's only going to go up from here if you do it correctly. Like, people are going to stick with this thing.
Yeah, it was great. In my last year, working with TSN and RDS, which I was in charge of overall, I brought in $25 million. That's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money.
It's a lot of cash in digital sales. One of my favorite stories is, I went to Universal Music, and the girl there didn't believe that, this media thing was catching on, this digital stuff. And they ran trailers on their own website. And I said I could measure it on my website. And I asked her how many downloads or how many times that, in a month. And she says, oh, we got about 1,300 views in a month. And I said, wow, that's it, eh? And I put it on TSN, and they ended up over 10,000 trailer views, and we were able to measure that. And she freaked out. All of a sudden, she started giving me $5,000 buys. And the first year she gave me 4 of them, which was $20,000. And by, the third or fourth year after that, she was still a great client of mine and was giving me $100,000 a year just in movie trailers.
See, I love that case study because sometimes you have to start out small with people. Some people, they need a sample. That's what they need more than anything else, just to know it's going to work before they open up their wallet.
I gave her a free ad campaign. It was the first one was a free ad campaign just to show her that it would work. And she was so impressed by the numbers that she goes, okay, yeah, you convinced me. And that's what you have to do sometimes. Like, you need to, crack open the door. And even if it has to, you have to give away some of the business to prove it. I mean, it was an unknown entity back then, right? So I had to do something. And I said, I even told my boss, I said, I might have to give her a free campaign. He goes, do what you got to do, Luch. You know this business better than anybody else. So I did. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Do you remember the movie that you ran?
Yeah,
for free?
it was called Undercover Brother. It was
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, if you mess with the fro, you gots to go.
That was the big line that. Was that okay?
Undercover Brother was the name of the movie.
Without using my phone, was that a Wayans Brothers film?
You know what? I don't know if it was a Wayans Brother. It may have been. You may need to look that one up. But I want to look that one up. I'll never forget that line. Undercover Brother was the name of the movie. I do remember it like it was yesterday.
The one downside to working in sports, though, is that very rarely does the company own the IP. And every couple of years, this stuff goes onto the market and people open up their wallets and they fight with each other for it. And so tell us what happened at TSN and how that brought you to Sportsnet.
As much as I love my good friend Keith Pelly, he also kind of shafted me on this one because he was actually in line for a promotion to be the head of Bell Media at the time. And I know I'm telling tales out of how's the saying go? Tales out of school. And he wanted to take all of the digital and broadcast rights away from TSN because at the time he was president of Sportsnet. So him and what was the CEO's name? Mohammed. Can't remember his name off totally, but he
was it the CEO at Rogers?
Yeah.
Was it Nadir?
Nadir Mohammed. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so him and Nadir wanted to put the screws to TSN and Bell Media. And what they did was they overpaid, and they grossly overpaid. And they know they grossly overpaid for that, right? Because they were counting on new media that was going to happen over the next 12 years. Well, here we are, I think in year 8 or year 7 of this of this deal, which is backloaded. It's going to be tough, for Rogers to continue to make money on this because of the fact that it is backloaded, even if the Leafs were to win the Stanley Cup, right? But you know what? But what ended up happening is we lost the hockey contract. I was asked by our president at the time how much this is going to cost in terms of revenue, and I said, when I did the actual calculations, and I had to be truthful, I said we're going to probably end up losing $4 million this year. Like our revenue is going to probably drop about $4 million. And at that time, just TSN was bringing in 12. So you're looking at about a 25% loss in revenue the year after Rogers got the contract. I was asked to go to Rogers from my good friend Alan Dark, great guy, and I went over there, and I was there for about just under a year, because what ended up happening there was I reported it into sports, and under Anthony Attard, another great guy, you may know him.
Oh, he's XMLSC, I believe.
XMLSC, that's right. Super, super, super guy. And Attard brought me, I was reporting into him, and then they decided they're going to centralize everything. So it'll be under the digital umbrella as opposed to the sports umbrella. So they wanted to do that. And then they figured they don't need a sales manager, which I was the national sales manager for them. And so they said, sorry, Lucia, you got to go. And I said, can they do that? And I went to see a lawyer, but they made me an incredible offer. So my lawyer basically just said, sign up, get out, go do what you got to do, but you got to take that deal. So I did. And so I left there, but on good terms. It wasn't anything that I could say was bad terms. So I've got nothing but praise for my former brethren at Rogers, for sure.
That hockey deal you reference, I've got another point of view on it. So I cut my teeth in broadcast at the CBC. And I remember at least once or twice a year, Bell Media would be doing an interview, usually at the Globe and Mail, talking about how they were going to buy the hockey rights. And I was at CBC when we lost the hockey song. Like, it seems like no one bothered to look at the contract to see, hey, you know what? We don't own this, and someone else could scoop it up. And I was there when the hockey song was bought by TSN, and it felt like, or at least a lot of people thought that the world was going to end. And then I moved on through my career, and I was actually at Rogers when Rogers won the hockey deal. And I find it so fascinating that everyone had their eye on Bell Media. Like, Bell Media is going to get the hockey rights. No one was looking at at Rogers, and they scooped them up out of nowhere. And I remember when that press release came out and everyone was celebrating it, there was a pit in my stomach, because I was thinking about my old friends and colleagues at CBC, because I looked at that and said, I'm sure some of them will be fine. Some of them might migrate over to Sportsnet, which they did. But there are going to be some people that are, for lack of a better term, SOL. Like, they're going to have to downsize, because I knew just how big hockey was to the CBC. And so that was a real rude awakening for me as well. I mean, I had no skin in the game whatsoever. So it's not like I'm taking anything personal by looking at it. But that was a real eye-opener for me. And it showed that while sports can be incredibly lucrative, it can be very volatile. Like, it can up and move in a heartbeat.
No, I totally agree with you. And that's the one thing that people don't realize, is that, these companies sign these multi-billion-dollar deals and multi-billion-dollar rights deals. But what ends up happening is, because of it, lives and families are shattered. They really are, because a lot of people are going to lose their job. And at TSN, there was a lot of us that lost our jobs. It was pretty much carnage over there. And you know what? And I know the carnage has happened at Rogers as well, because we know that they overpaid for this hugely. And, I wish them all the best there, but there's going to be cuts made. Chances of I don't see a guy like Ron McLean being able to last another year. Right. And there's going to be others, they dropped hometown hockey because it was just too expensive to keep running with hometown hockey.
Well, when they brought him over, didn't they relegate him and put George Stroumboulopoulos at the forefront? And then after about a year, George was moved into the background, and then Ron was back to being the face of hockey?
That's exactly what happened. It was for 2 years that George was there. And, I got to meet George. Great guy. Really, really good guy.
He's fantastic. He really is.
Super. And a great interviewer. Fantastic interviewer, as you know, and now living in LA. And just overall, what I really found is that they couldn't make up their mind which way they go. They wanted that cool factor, right? So they brought George in as the cool guy because he is a pretty cool guy, and the way he dresses, the way he acts, the way he carries himself. But it just wasn't cutting it with the core hockey audience, right? It wasn't the hockey audience loved Ron McLean and they kept wanting him back. Now, from what I'm hearing, is that people do not like Ron McLean, obviously because of what happened with Don Cherry, and he's getting a little bit stagnant right now. That's what I'm hearing.
At the annual Ron McLean Gary Bettman interviews, those were great. He would he would not pull his punches. You don't see a lot of sports interviews like that, especially between the rights holder of a professional sport and the commissioner of that league.
I agree with that.
Very totally contentious.
Agree. Yeah, it's I just wonder why I'm surprised Gary hasn't told him that he's not going to do it if he continues the line of questioning. But you know what? Gary's a tough cookie. I met him 3 times. I got to go to 3 All-Star games and met him all 3 times as the guest of the NHL because I had to negotiate the digital rights when I was at TSN in the early days. So I got to go to Minnesota, Dallas, and Atlanta back then for the All-Star games. And I got to meet Gary. Nice enough guy, but tough as nails, I'll tell you right now. You could see he's a different cat, that's for sure.
He takes a lot of flack in Canada for what happened with the old Jets and the Nordiques, but I got to give him credit for how he really, really helped put hockey on the U.S. map, at least in the 90s. Like, I know it's tapered off a bit, but I still believe that hockey would not be as big as it is in the United States right now had it not had that boom period in the 90s.
100% agree with you. 100%.
Like, I really think right now his only flaw, Gary Bettman, is he's just hanging on to the Phoenix Coyotes. Like, aren't they playing in like a university arena now where it's like enough for 5,000 to 6,000 people?
The Mullet Arena. The first night, everybody was given like mullet wigs, and they all wore mullets. It was incredible. Like, that's the University of Arizona. Like, it's just crazy. It's and it fills up every night, and it's just a crazy atmosphere. I thought Las Vegas was a crazy atmosphere, but apparently Arizona is just as nuts, right? And it's only 5,000 people, so they're selling out every game.
See, I give him credit for Vegas. Like, the fact that everyone else wanted to stay away from that market apart from an all-star or an exhibition game just because it was the only state that league had allowed gambling, and they figured the black market would impact this, would infiltrate the sport itself. I give him credit for saying, you know what, screw it, we're going all in there. Like, everyone else is following suit now. You got the Raiders in there. I know the NBA has had at least one all-star game in Vegas. I'm surprised they don't have a franchise there yet. I'm surprised Major League Baseball isn't there yet. But credit to him for going all in on Vegas and just doing it. No pun intended, all in. I'm making it sound like he's gambling, but he kind of is a little bit with house money when he does that.
Yeah, and you know what? You know how expensive the seats are now over there to get tickets? It's incredible. It truly is incredible. And it sells out every game. Every game is sold out. And they're doing well again this year with Jack Eichel, of course, which is a little sore point with me being a Sabres fan. But we digress there.
Are they what, first or second in the West? They're definitely in the top 3.
They're first in the Pacific. Yeah, they're head and shoulders above everyone else in that division. But nice to see the Kraken doing well as well.
That is good. It's nice to see the franchise or the new franchises do well, because you kind of feel like, I kind of use the Grizzlies, the Vancouver Grizzlies, as an example of that. You kind of have this sort of 5 to 7 year window to find some semblance of success.
Right.
And if that doesn't happen, then you start hearing, rumors of relocation.
Well, yeah, especially if people aren't showing up, right? And that's what happened with the Grizzlies. Nobody started showing up. So they went to Memphis, and it's a success story with what the Grizzlies have done in Memphis. That's for sure.
Do you think Vancouver would be ready for another franchise? Like, do you think maybe they were just a little ahead of their time?
Personally, I don't know. There's enough basketball on the West Coast in LA, Portland. You've got 2 LA teams. You got the Clippers, the Lakers, Golden State. That's 3. You had
the Supersonics are gone, though. They've been gone for a while.
They've been gone for a while. Yeah, I was shocked that happened. So if Seattle, which is probably as close to Vancouver as you can get with a U.S. major market, and if they failed, you've got to question that whole, northwest region of the U.S. and how basketball crazy they are, which I don't think they are. It's more of a laid back vibe out that way. So I'm not sure if they're ever going to get a team back there.
Do you follow the Canadian Elite Basketball League?
I follow some of it. I haven't got to see the games yet. Mike Moriali, who used to play with the Argos, is the commissioner there, and David Tom is I believe he's one of the vice presidents there. He was with North Pole Hoops in Toronto here, so they've got a really good product going there. And I believe Drake is part owner of the
Scarborough Shooting Stars.
Scarborough Shooting Stars, yeah. So they, I want to get out. I didn't get a chance to get out this year. Actually, one of my buddies is a referee he's ref the CEBL. So, and he says it's good ball. It's pretty good ball. He really likes it. He goes, a lot of these guys are, some of the guys are going to make the show for sure, right? So it's worth going out, and I'll give the CEBL a definite plug because it's good ball. Anytime you get to see that kind of caliber, it's pretty impressive.
I've been following them on social media, and I've watched the clips on YouTube that they throw up, and sometimes you can find a full game up there. And what I've kind of discerned is it's a lot like the CFL. In some of the bigger markets in Ontario, maybe it's not getting the attention it deserves, but when you start to get out west, like where the Saskatchewan Rattlers play, I think Edmonton. They just moved Edmonton as well. They just moved the Guelph franchise is moving to Calgary, and I think they just moved the Fraser Valley franchise to Vancouver proper. I don't know how that one's going to pan out, but it seems like when you get into the prairie provinces and the Rockies, they really appreciate it. Like it seems to get a pretty good pull from the local markets.
Well, yeah, we're kind of spoiled here in Toronto, being as monster of a market as we are. So, if you've ever been to Saskatoon, you know how rabid they are about their Rough Riders out there. There's nobody in the CFL that has fans like the Rough Riders. I'll say that to anybody who loves football and knows the CFL. It's a different. They're cut from a different cloth out that way, man. But I'll tell you, when you get like pro sports or semi-pro sports out into those small markets, it's incredible how much they, how many people go out to watch. It's really, really well. It's really well followed out that way.
Okay, we got sidetracked a little bit, but after Sportsnet, you moved on to Q Digital Media. So what brought you there, and what were you doing at Q? Actually, first give us an overview. What is Q Digital Media?
Q was it's basically an aggregate. It's an ad house, right? So what they basically did was they represented a whole bunch of different sites, and some of those, and they had some really, really, really good brands, I should say, like NFL.com. We repped Bleacher Report, UFC, SB Nation. I mean, those were the sports sites. Vox.com, Daily Mail from England, CNN, Rolling Stone. So there were some really great titles run by a gentleman by the name of David UK, super guy. And, and it was fun. It was fun. I had 6 reps working for me. And it was just one of those places where you talked advertising, you talk sports and regular, advertising, just basically advertising talk all day long. And a great place to hang out, really was. I was the director of sales there. So, like I said, after a year and a half, though, of being there, I just said, I need a break from advertising. I just need to get away for a little bit. So I took some time off.
Bringing everything full circle.
Yeah.
Something that you've been suffering from that a lot of people do in this industry, and I'm finding that it's pretty endemic of the Canadian advertising and marketing world, is ageism. So talk to us about how it's impacted you in your career and how you're trying to counter it. Because this is something that, if we don't find a way to fix this and deal with this head on, because we need to start treating, and I'm speaking about experience when I use this term, our senior leaders. If we are not giving them the respect they deserve and the opportunities they deserve, and the opportunities that can be passed down to us, like just the chance to impart that kind of knowledge and experience on a new generation, I think we're really selling ourselves short. And at the same time, too, we have to understand that everyone's going to get there. It reminds me of, have you seen the film Rocky Balboa?
Of course.
There's a scene where the fight's done between Rocky and Mason Dixon, or Mason the Line Dixon is the name of his opponent. And they get close to each other, and he leans into him and he says, "You're a crazy old man." And he goes, "You'll get there." And it's funny because people will make comments or jokes or they'll employ ageism. And at the same time, too, it's like, what, you think you're going to stay young forever? You're not going to be at that position. So this is something we need to work together on. I know I'm rambling right now, but just take us through that.
No, you're not rambling. I hate to say, what you're doing is you're hitting the nail on the head. Let me give you an example. I am the liaison officer slash and education officer for the Toronto Association of Basketball Officials. One of my job is to recruit new referees and train new referees on how to become referees. And a lot of these kids that come in, and some older people as well, come in, and they rely on me to basically show them the ropes, and they get to referee games with me. And well, one thing I keep getting over and over is, you know what, Luch, when you're reffing, you seem extremely calm. No matter what the circumstances on the court, you really know your stuff. And I use this as a parallel to my working world, because if the Toronto Basketball Association, of officials trusts me to bring along their new referees, in other words, help them become referees, why aren't more companies using senior exec, like even as myself, who was a fairly senior executive or on the executive committees, why are they not using me and my experience to help these younger salespeople get to the next level? They can rely on my experience. I could tell them how to, manage certain clients, how to handle certain situations. So, as I say, the problem, is that there's so much bias about it. And as I said, ageism is not based on biology, it's socially constructed. And that's where herein lies the problems, Victor. This is where I get really upset. There's a stigma in business that people, especially older people, right? And, they think that because of their physical or mental capacity, they think that, oh, they're going down. That's not ageism. That's ableism. And there's a difference between ableism and ageism. I know that I'm still able because I run up and down the court. I run my butt off at my age up and down the court, and people can't believe how old I am that I'm running up and down the court and making great calls. And so when you tie this back into business, and I know that I'm still able. So sadly, ableism and ageism to me is brushed with the same stroke. And that to me, my friend, is a mistake.
Something you said in there really resonates with me. Like, the whole thing resonated with me, but you spoke about how when you're on the basketball court, people can't believe how calm and collected you are. Like, when
Right.
something happens, you're not losing your shit.
No.
And it's funny because I've been in the advertising industry since I was 24, 25. I'm 40 right now. And I look
Mhm.
back and go, my God, the way I was in meetings before, like, I wasn't bad, I'd say, but I was a little bit more eccentric. If someone said the wrong thing, maybe I'd react a little too emotionally. And right now, I feel I'm handling things better than I ever could. And that's because of experience. And I feel like 5 years from now, I'm going to handle things even better. I'll look back at, from 45, I'll look back at 40 and go, Jesus, there are things I could have done a lot differently. And it seems like we're not putting value in experience anymore. So I just wanted to let you know that I completely empathize with you. And without making this about me and going into details, at 40, I've had a couple of bouts of ageism already. Like, nothing big, but little things that kind of popped up that kind of spoke to me and made me say, huh, you know what? If I don't find a way to nip some of this stuff in the butt right now, it's only going to get worse as every year
Yeah.
progresses.
Right now, it's like it's totally, prevalent. It's unrecognized, and it's unchallenged, and that's a problem because it's not really being challenged. There were other movements that have come forward, and they've been challenged. Now, ageism is one of those things that is starting to get a little bit with, the Lisa LaFlamme situation that happened a few months back, but
Yes.
it's still not where it should be. People aren't talking enough about it. People aren't allowing people in their 40s, middle 40s, late 40s, 50s, 60s to go out and, bring them on board and let's see what they can do. Let's see how they can help out. But the problem is a lot of these companies feel they have to overpay these people. And some people like myself, I don't need a big, six-figure paycheck like I used to. I don't need that anymore. I'd love to just go in for the sake of helping out and being part of a team, sitting down with people, ideating with them, coming up with solutions. I'm a solutions focused guy. That's what I did best. I used to tell my sales guys, listen, guys, don't come to me with a problem. come to me with a problem, but also come to me with a solution, a possible solution. And what I'll do is I'll sit down with you and we'll work on it together, but at least think about the problem. Like, think about how we're going to solve this. Don't just come to me and say, "Hey, Luch, we got a problem." Okay, well, so did Houston at one time, and we know how that worked out, right? So that's why I say, hey, you know what? Let's work on things together. And it's amazing what you can, you get young people and older people together. You'd be shocked at what you can accomplish, right? Because younger people may not have, they don't have the experience that you have, but then you don't have the, you might not have the get up and go that a younger person may have, right? Who's just so energized and they've got tons of energy. But what they don't have is they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the experience. They don't, a lot of them don't have the how to, simple how to. Have you tried to do this? Have you tried to do this? Have you tried to do this? Oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. Well, yeah, it's because I've lived it. I know what it felt like, right? And I've walked in your shoes. I can empathize. I can sympathize. I've been there before, right? But you've got all this energy. Let me help you achieve what you need to achieve, but even doing it faster,
And also
right?
the people experience as well, too, because you can teach someone something technical and maybe it takes them a week to learn it, a month to learn it, and so forth. But the people skills that come with selling, that's like doing reps, reps, reps. It's like how many meetings are you pumping out, going through those meetings, and it only comes with time. Like you
Yeah.
cannot make up 20 years worth of experience in 3 to 4 years. You just can't do that at all.
No, you're absolutely right. And you know what, sales sometimes it just becomes reflexive because you've got all these experiences that you've developed over the years. So what happens is you get into a situation and you can, it's like sports, like anything you do in sports. Like the St. Louis Blues, for example, they lost 8 in a row and everybody was writing them off. And on my podcast, which by the way,
You want to plug it, go for it. Now's a perfect. I love that segue.
all right, the best damn fantasy hockey podcast, and it is on Spotify. So if you get a chance to listen and you're a hockey fan, definitely listen to it. But as I was saying, the St. Louis Blues had lost 8 games in a row, and one of the things my partner in this said to me is, "Do you think they're going to come out of it?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he says, "Well, why do you think that?" I said, "Because they can rely on past experience. They just won the cup. The majority of those guys just won the cup, so they know what it takes to get out of a funk like that." And it's no different than in sales. When you're in sales or you're in marketing, sometimes you're going to get into a situation where things are not going your way. So what ends up happening is you rely on past experiences to get you out of those bad experiences. So this is why I say that the veterans, as I call us in the advertising game, we still have a place to help out the younger generation without question.
Tony, this has been a fantastic chat. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Go ahead. I'm ready to rock and roll.
The campaign you're most proud of?
The campaign I'm most proud of was Nike Golf and getting them on the Masters for 9 consecutive years. They were a great partner and they spent lots of money with me. So I was great. It was great dealing with those guys.
Your favorite movie?
2 of them, actually. Godfather, Trading Places. I had to throw a comedy in there as well.
A very Italian, The Godfather. Like The Godfather, not number 2 or number 3?
1 and 2. I will never talk about number 3.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
I don't think there's any question. Sir Alfredo James Pacino from New York City. Oh, yeah. I love Al.
Oh.
Love Big Al.
I love that Scent of a Woman reference right there.
Yeah, I had to.
My follow-up to that question, if Hollywood were to make that movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
Living and loving life and laughing. A lot of L's goes with Luch.
Your favorite book?
Open by Andre Agassi. Fantastic read.
Your favorite song?
So many, but my overall, the one I just absolutely love is I Am the Walrus by the Beatles.
The best advice you have ever received?
Back to good old dad. Always said to me, treat a woman like gold and she will treat you like gold. Treat her like crap and expect to be treated like crap. And that was when I was 17 years old, and those words have never left me.
Amen to that. My signature closing question, if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
I would be probably teaching tennis as a career because it was a big part of my life. I did teach it for 4 years. I love the game. The game has given me a lot of opportunities and a lot of fun, and it's really helped me stay in shape for many, many, many years.
Tony, this was a fantastic chat. Thank you so much for your time.
Victor, I absolutely adored it. I loved it. I appreciate everything you're doing for this and for the media. And hopefully one day we can actually talk about more about comic books, because I will never get tired of talking about that.
That's it for today's show. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram @VicGenova.